Raised bed gardening involves growing plants in soil that is higher than the ground. This could mean anything from cardboard on the ground with soil on it, or boxes built on legs. In our case, we aren't building a permanent feature, and I'm happy to garden close to the ground, using shallow raised beds, tires, boxes, pots and containers. I'm applying the 3R principles when selecting my materials, finding things around my home that could be put to better use. Wanting raised beds in a hurry in order to get going in time for planting, I decided to use shelves that were cluttering the corner of the garage that once was my gym. If you are wanting to make the beds a permanent fixture, you probably want planks of about 5 centimeters that won't warp, and the wood would be better to be untreated. But our intention is to get plants into the soil and food on your table as soon as possible. And our theme is reuse, reduce, recycle. So the shelves will work perfectly. The frames would be the big beds. The shelves would be turned into small square beds. The backboards would be used on the areas where the grass wasn't worth saving, to choke out the old grass and weeds. The shelves were good, as the beds would be wide enough to reach across comfortably, and more or less the right depth. I could fit 2 of them next to each other comfortably, and still have space to get a wheelbarrow and a lawnmower in between. You can see the advantages of raised beds immediately. We had planned our layout using bamboo sticks, but once we placed the frames, it made more sense to shift the beds around. Raised beds give you an exact understanding of what your end result will be, allowing you to see if you can easily navigate around them, reach over them, or comfortably kneel between them. Raised beds have other distinct advantages too. If you've got poor soil, you can avoid dealing with it entirely by building raised beds, then filling them with a custom mix of soil ideally suited for what you are growing. They are easier to maintain and they warm up quicker in spring, so you can plant earlier. The one downside is that they will drain and dry out quicker than beds dug into the ground, so you will need to water more. Considering space is a factor, I'll be using bamboo to encourage whatever plants that will grow up to do so. We will be making trestles for support and to encourage plants to climb, rather than taking up valuable space on the bed floor. These supports also work for bird nets, frost covers and shade for the hottest days, and for protection from the wind if needed. If there are farm animals or game roaming freely, you'll need to set up a fence around your beds to keep them out. If you have a dog like Max who loves vegetables, you'll need to do the same. If you have access to funds, you can buy shade cloth or nets to cover your plants when needed. But old fishing nets or orange bags stitched together will keep the birds away from seedlings. And frost cloth can be replaced with sheets of plastic, which will protect your seedlings from late frost during the night or from excessive heat during the day. Just be sure that the covers that you use are easy to install and remove, as they will only be used when they're needed. And your plants want as much fresh air and natural light as they can get. And it gets annoying having to cover and uncover your plants if it's not properly thought through, so you might actually start neglecting them. I want to attract pollinators, but don't want to use too much space in the beds. Plus, I'll be replanting and rotating crops, which may limit my space once the flowers are matured. So I'll be growing some of my pollinators and trap plants alongside the beds, using this old gutter as a bed and a boundary. There's no right or wrong raised beds, and they can be made as tall as you want for convenience when gardening, but most crops will happily grow in 15 centimeters of soil if the bed has enough volume. So before you make your beds too high, be sure you have enough material to fill them before you start. We are fortunate to have Panda Green Solutions as a client, so they have helped us source discarded materials to be reused in our garden. By drawing up my plan, I was able to decide on what beds need what depth and what type of soil, according to the preferences of the crops and companion plants I plan to plant. The length, width and height of the bed will allow you to see how many seedlings should be placed in a row, according to the recommended spacing needed for each specific plant. Seedlings should never be planted too close to the sides of a bed or a container, as it will restrict root growth in that general direction. Even though our beds are quite shallow, there's still no need to fill them with only soil and compost. I plan to leave enough space between the plants to allow for more than enough volume. So I considered each bed, what I'd be growing in there, and began filling them accordingly. Bed 1. In this bed we will grow cauliflower, radish, broccoli and spinach. But this soil mix would work for garlic, marigold, onions, oregano and thyme. The crops don't need a lot of depth, so I'm starting with a layer of logs and branches. Then a layer of leaves and twigs. Then soil mixed with a lot of still solid matter. This is all fill. If you're planting in shallow containers, you don't need fill, just your soil mix. I'm compressing this layer only, and only because I want to fill all the gaps between the bottom layer. This will be the last time I compress the soil or walk on the beds. Next, I'm adding my balance of soil and a good amount of compost. The last layer is just a thin layer of sand. I'm gently working this in, as sand will compact on the surface and stop water penetrating. Plus, I want to be sure the top layer has oxygen. Once done, I'm giving the bed a good watering and then covering it with a thick layer of mulch in the form of dry leaves. Then watering again. A hosepipe is convenient, but if you harvest rainwater, it would be better. And it's free. As a mulch, you can use leaves, straw, wood chips or old browns. It's there to keep in the moisture and choke out weed more than it is for nutrition. Bed 2. This will be dedicated to the Three Sisters growing method, growing corn, squash, beans and peas as a fourth companion. Planting members of the squash family together can cause cross-pollination, which could affect the seeds. So we will stick to one kind of squash in bed 2, but we will grow some of the other varieties in the containers and ties. Although ours will be on a small scale, it's highly recommended that if you have the space to grow lots of corn, you try this method. It's been used for centuries. The corn supports climbing beans or peas, the squash shades the ground to prevent moisture loss, and the fast-growing beans and peas are nitrogen fixers, which make nitrogen available to the other plants. It would be better not to plant next to this hedge, or a shed, or a wall, but I'm going to do the best with what I have. And as this bed gets the first morning sun, I will get the maximum amount of sunshine I can for these three sisters to grow together. We will be building mounds on top of the soil to plant the corn and adding nitrogen-rich compost for the corn. Bed 3. Bed 3 is for eggplant, Swiss chard and potatoes, although this soil mix would also be good to grow broccoli, spinach, marigolds, oregano and green beans. We will be growing potatoes in two ways. In this bed, we will bury potatoes wrist deep. The bottom is filled with twigs and leaves as fill, plus a mix of loam soil and compost, and again, extra sand for drainage, which means I may have to water more regularly. Bed 4. Bed 4 is for the sweet potatoes, beetroots and beans. It's filled with loam soil and lots of compost. Sweet potatoes prefer the heat, so we will be planting only once our slips have grown roots and are ready to be transplanted into the ground. Until then, we will be growing a mix of beetroots and beans in bed 4. This soil would also be good for companions such as spinach, garlic, peas, basil, thyme, marigold and nasturtiums. bed 5. Bed 5 is for carrots, lettuce and nasturtiums to act as trap flowers. This is the deepest bed, filled with loam soil and extra sand. Carrots like loose, sandy soil without rocks or solid matters which will disrupt their growth. This soil mix makes the bed suitable for herbs like rosemary and sage and companions like peppers, spinach, cabbage, peas, leeks and chives. I'll also be adding some tomatoes, which I've transplanted from pots I've been growing earlier in the season. These will provide a bit of shade for the lettuce once the sun is at its hottest. Bed 6. This will be the second potato bed, and we are going to leave it very shallow because we will be using the hill method. All we need for now is a thin layer of loam soil and compost made wet and covered with mulch. Once we place our potatoes and cover them, we will be adding soil as the plants grow, creating a hill around the plants as they grow higher until the bed is full. This method offers a good yield as the plants have more space to grow, but it means you won't be able to share the bed with companions until the bed is full. Then space could be used to grow carrots, beans, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, chives, leeks, marigolds and nasturtiums. Exactly the same rules and principles will be applied to the ties, pots and containers, but without the need for fill. The soil mix is loam soil with added compost and some extra sand for drainage. If you are growing in containers, preparing for planting is a whole lot simpler and you can start later in the season. But start sourcing loam soil and sand now and get your compost going so your seedlings and juvenile plants will have lots of nutrition. Soil balance and nutrition is an ongoing process. If you're going the raised bed route and you have prepared your beds before spring, you will need to top them up as the fallen material in the beds will decompose and shrink further. When you do, be sure to add the right balance of soil for the plants in the bed. That brings us to the end of this crash course. I hope this has helped you to get started and I wish you all the success on your path to self-sustainability. But before we sign off, some advice for getting prepared for the next steps. Start gathering materials, experiment with your soil mixes and get composting. If you have any potatoes that are developing sprouts from their eyes, keep them aside as these will be the parent crops for your potato beds. If you have sweet potatoes, cut them in half and leave them in water on a sunny windowsill so that they can grow slips. And once ready, allow these slips to root, ready for planting once the weather has warmed up. If you buy organic vegetables, keep the seeds, but be sure to rinse them off and let them dry out properly to avoid mold or rotting. A special thank you to Panda Green Solutions for the reusable materials and to Living Seeds for sponsoring seeds and planting accessories. Once the complete learner experience is released through our platform, subscribers will be eligible for a discount on selected items through the Living Seeds online store. They also offer a host of free downloads, including planting charts per province. So it's definitely worth visiting their livingseeds.co.za website if you are a beginner seeking advice or looking to join a community. But whether you are growing for fun or growing to support your family or the community, I hope you will join us for the full journey. Thank you for spending this time with me. And I truly hope that what I've shared is the start of your journey to years of high yields and good nutrition for your family.